Legend has it that once our world was whole. Our people were one. Our society was united. But then the fires came.
Lair's setting is a world in chaos, and the chaos is coming from a climate catastrophe where basically volcanoes have thrown the whole world into turmoil.
What has happened is that it's made it difficult for them to have fresh water, it's made it difficult for them to farm, and now resources are scarce.
We're asking a lot of questions in it which are pertinent to our world as it is nowadays, and trying to inject that a little bit into the story.
As devastating as their advent was, the volcanoes unleashed an even greater force upon the people. Fear.
We're trying to reinvent fantasy on a certain level.
Lair is basically about a guy named Roan who is a sky guard in the Assyrian army. It's sort of the story of his inner journey and outer journey as he fights against the evil in the world.
He's fighting a war that he doesn't necessarily want to fight.
Mount up, Roan! The Mokai are torching the city!
But he feels a sense of obligation of protecting his people, his city, from the other race. So he's sort of a reluctant warrior initially.
Two societies, two paths, one working with nature, the other conquering it.
Volcanoes have split the continent and split up the groups of people. There is now a upper-class aristocracy, the Assyrians, that have all the culture and all the know-how and all the beautiful buildings. And then there is a lower class, the Mokai, that live separate from them, that are more thought of as barbarians.
And the Assyrians move forward, taking nature and bending it to serve their will. So you see a lot of them using things like water wheels and dominating the environment, whereas the Mokai tried to involve nature in their culture more, and what ended up happening for them is that actually gave them a technological advantage.
I can't believe the range their catapults have. Who said the Mokai were primitive?
Kobakai is the young Hotspur of the Mokai. His father is one of the main generals. His father's missing an arm from all the horrible warfare that he suffered. And he is a tired soldier. He's tired of the fighting and he wants to end madness between the two countries.
It's a good morning for peace.
It is always a good morning for peace, General.
That's why you need so many soldiers.
Enough, Kobakai!
His son, who I play, Koba, is not so hip to this. He's not so trusting of the Assyrians.
Of the volcanoes that have been sent.
Roan is reasonably idealistic, and when the politics in the world start to take shape and the story unfolds, he'll find himself having to make some very difficult moral choices. And we're hoping that the player really comes along for the ride and experiences Roan's journey along with him.
We shouldn't be fighting!
The Diviner prophesied the battle, so it is done!
The fate of the world is in your hands. To succeed, you must challenge all you know and seek a deeper truth. At your command is a living, breathing war machine that can set ablaze your enemies or devour them whole.
You are the hero as part of a Top Gun squadron of Dragon Riders who is protecting one of the two civilizations and is pretty much fighting in a war against the other civilization. So you've got lots of stuff going on in the air, on the ground, and it's very much comparable to the Top Gun nowadays, two guys in really fast jets.
The great thing about flying in Lair is that now we have the 6-axis controller on the PlayStation 3. In all of our previous games, we spent a lot of time tweaking the analog controllers and trying to make it feel natural. But now that we have a tilt sensor in the controller, we're able to give the player this really intuitive feedback loop where just by moving the controller, it's like pulling on the reins of the dragon and you just feel like you're in control.
We got the controller, it's great, new hardware, and everyone huddles around the desk and looks at it. So the first thing we did is just take the controller and use the tilt as a replacement for the joystick, left-right. You tilt left, you tilt right, and everyone tried it and it's like, this is crap, I don't want to play this. And so Julie and I sat down, we said, wait a minute, let us try a little bit and continually replace parts of the game to work with this new way of interacting with the game.
After the first day, where everybody was extremely skeptical, then people slowly started coming around and said, you know what, it actually controls better.
Well, the really nice thing about the controller is it matches the way you would think that a dragon would move. When a player tilts the controller down, they know what's going to happen. They know their dragon's going to descend. So in a lot of ways, it made it easier to maneuver and much more intuitive.
And as with everything, you must learn to master the beast until you fight as one.
We've now developed an obstacle course which allows players to just play around and experiment and see how the controller works and how it controls the dragon. With the joystick, you only have a certain amount of range. You have it centered, and then you have to try to figure out between the center position and full extreme position where exactly you wanted to turn, how sharp you wanted to turn. Very difficult when you're talking about a little tiny joystick.
On top of that, what we're using is a gesture recognition system. So if you do certain things which you would do when you hold the reins of a dragon, the game recognizes that and translates it without you having to press combinations of complicated buttons. It translates it into very easy movements. So for example, if you whip it up, then you do a 180 turn. If you slam your pad down, you dash forward with a dragon.
When you're on the ground, it's the same thing. You're in there, and just by jerking the controller to the right, the dragon will take his arms and he'll swipe at the enemy. It's very intuitive, and it's really fun.
Not all dragons are equal, and through many battles you will face multiple breeds.
There are several different dragon species in Lair, and they come from different regions. The player, as Roan, is riding on what we call the Plains Dragon. Easy go. And this is sort of a middle-of-the-road dragon, but even that is big and powerful. He's sort of like an SUV with wings and tail and teeth.
We have very light and weak dragons, like an ice dragon, for example. This kind of dragon, it's really simple to usually defeat him. Oftentimes it might just be a ranged fireball or a flame breath against him. We also have the much stronger, heavier dragons, like a dark dragon, for example, and that's the kind of dragon that you really need to beat him up quite a bit to defeat him.
Your fire isn't enough! You have to go in for the kill!
Obviously doesn't want you to attack him. He's trying to be evasive. He's doing evasive maneuvers. Within that melee mode, he's also trying to block your moves and try to get out of that so that he can attack you. The other things you can do is you can use your environments to your advantage. If you know enemies are chasing you and you're outnumbered, it'd be a good idea to fly down by friendly troops and use your own troops to actually attack enemy dragons.
The combat in Lair is designed to get you closer and closer and closer to your target. First thing you do is you pick out who you want to attack, and there's a simple intuitive mechanism by which you can get the camera to focus on your enemy, and by shaking the controller down you can get your dragon to dash right towards your enemy.
We're calling it the pursuit bubble, and it's a bubble in the sense that you are in close range, flying still through the air with the other dragon, and you can start by actually using the physicality of the controller. You can slam into the other guy. He evades you, and you kind of do this ballet-like fight in the air, flying next to each other. Then the next step is, once you've rammed often enough into him, both of you actually tumble out of the sky or start basically falling down, while they duke it out, really with their claws and in a very inhuman and very nasty, beastly fighting game.
Killing a dragon is no easy task. To do so, you must summon all your strength to bring the beast down.
There's
When rendering the soundscape for a world where evolution has taken a turn, where instead of lions roaming the plains, you have dragons flying the skies, believability is key.
People who follow Factor 5's work know that audio is one of our key focuses. If we're going to have these realistic-looking dragons that move realistically, the sound is just as important in terms of selling them as believable creatures.
So the team set out on an expedition to the San Francisco Zoo to record the sounds of all types of animals.
Of course, we're recording the bears and every large creature, but what's surprising really, if you go to the zoo and you listen in, we are actually recording real animals, which you wouldn't think of in sound terms at all.
According to the zookeepers, one of the shyest creatures at the zoo also makes the most unusual noises.
So for the koala bears, we were actually in the cages. We didn't get anything for a while. I think they were a bit nervous. And it was when we were leaving when they finally decided to start making noise.
But while the zoo is full of exotic animals, don't expect to see them in the game.
The fantastic creatures are based on real-world animals in many cases. So we, for example, have a pretty giant rhino-based creature. But of course, in terms of sound, we want to base it on elephants, rhinos, going into that direction. The PS3 is able to do sound the way movies have been doing it for the last couple of years, so we need to use the same techniques. A sound library always tries to go middle ground, and you don't want middle ground, especially not when you're talking about a massive giant which is smashing through the world. So when you're creating a movie, you go out and record individual sounds for that movie, and that's exactly what we're doing here for the game.
The coolest sound we got today probably was the hippo in the beginning when he was coming out of the water and doing this weird noise.
That was great, yeah.
Afterwards, they started feeding them apples and a little bit of everything actually, and they were enjoying that quite a bit and chomping down on that, so got some good sounds doing that too.
While the animals were usually kept safely behind bars, the sound team always had to be careful not to get too close.
Having the lions lunge at me was by far the most exciting thing. I've never been about 10 feet in front of a lion while it's just jumping right at me, so that was really exciting.
And on occasion, the zookeepers led the team into locations strictly off limits to the general public.
Hi, we're going to go in here and you're going to see the bears up close, and there's bars, and I want you to stay well away from the bars because if you stick any equipment or fingers, they will be gone.
The polar bears were pretty exciting. I mean, all these animals, the big ones, just have this incredible low frequency to them that you just don't hear with any other type of animal.
Okay, guys, that's a wrap. Let's go.
Hey, wait a second. Come back. Hey!
And since the San Francisco Zoo didn't have any dragons to record, ultimately, the team had to improvise.
A dragon sound, obviously, is like nothing you've heard before. But then on the other hand, you want it to be real and coming out of nature. So what you take is you take a lion sound, and then that might be your baseline. Then maybe under it, you mix in a really, really low rumble from an elephant. And then on top of it, maybe an elephant scream.
One of the things that's really funny is that the biggest, loudest part of one of our dragon roars is actually a robin pitched way down low and slowed down, and it becomes this fearsome element in the creature's voice.
All of that really blends together. To the human ear, you subconsciously get this feeling this is a real sound, but you cannot really pinpoint it. And that's really the trick with sound design.
It's not funny. Come on.
When working on a next-generation title like Lair, the team at Part4of4 wanted the most realistic animations possible, so they turned to the motion capture experts at Sony Computer Entertainment.
Lair is a photorealistic world, and we want all of the animation and graphics to support that. Everything needs to be believable. And when you're dealing with the human characters, motion capture really is an excellent technology for getting that believable motion in a reasonable time frame at a reasonable cost.
Motion capture is the art of acquiring human motion via technology, and it's all based off of light. If your subject or your actor has a reflective marker on it, if one camera sees that marker, that shows up as a reflection in that camera. If then 3 cameras can agree on where it sees a reflection, it can then triangulate that marker in space.
Although motion capture has been around for a long time, one of the biggest improvements has to do with the quality of the performances.
This is my 3rd time doing motion capture. I've actually been doing martial arts since I was 13. I do a lot of action films, so they called me in for this because I have a lot of weapons experience also.
The hardest part as an actor doing motion capture is probably the same as most actors when they're dealing with special effects, is you have to use your imagination because a lot of what we're dealing with is not actually there on set with us. Fight sequences are done in a way that is very surreal on set. Nothing really actually happens until it's all put together in the final game.
For Lair, the team used motion capture for many of the in-game cinematic scenes.
The scene that I was just doing, I was actually riding a dragon, and we're looking for water because I'm parched, I'm wounded, injured. Renkai, the other character who's played by Cindy, is fighting a spider monster.
I am playing Renkai, and I'm sort of the oracle. I'm the wise woman who convinces the hero to go and save the village.
I've never had to kill for a drink of water before.
You're more fortunate than many.
After that, we sat down next to a campfire and talked about how he was going to go on to save his people.
I murdered their families, destroyed their homes.
It's relatively easy to capture a single person doing things, but then when it gets to a crowd scene and you want to have that interacting with motion capture, it's a very complex process, but you get a level of emotional realism due to it, which beforehand and without motion capture is practically impossible to do.
You stay here, and then the camera will go to the captain.
For the bridge peace talk sequence that we did today, we spent the day before that actually choreographing how we wanted the death sequence to happen. Ely, the director, and I were working on how we'd want to use the striker to kill all 3 characters with the same weapon. The actors jumped in and helped out with some choreographing as well.
1, 2, what are you doing?
The main reason I was counting is for the person who is in front of me, because my character whips this striker out, and a claw comes out of one end, connects with a chain, impales the person at the far end of the table, and then I wrap the chain around the person in front of me. And there's a blade at the other end, which I stab into the person who's coming this way. The problem was this person here in front of me had his back to me, so he couldn't really see what I was doing because obviously there was no chain around his neck. So I was counting it out, and on 3 was when I was wrapping the chain. 4, I was taking him this way. 5, I was taking him that way. I was also helping him with my hand on his back.
Once the performance is over, the job is far from complete.
There's quite a bit more that goes into it. Basically, you'll take all of your markers that we acquire, and then you have to do what's called tracking those. Since it is a light-based system, you get what's called occlusion. If you have 2 guys rolling around, that will occlude markers, and then those need to be rebuilt. And then you have to do a retarget, which then puts it back onto the actual asset that will be going into your game.
While motion capture is a highly technical art form, sometimes the team uses some simple aids to help in the process.
Yeah, there you go. That's what we used. We used a cart with a rolled up wrestling mat. Super high tech.
Father! This is the diviner's work, Roan. He will destroy us all.
The power and beauty of the cinematics in Lair rival even the biggest budget Hollywood special effects, propelling the story forward, deepening the characters, and giving us insight to the world. But as with any movie, stunning visuals are only half of the equation. That's where the Foley artist comes in.
Since the divide, my people have known nothing but war.
Foley is really the recreation of sounds in sync with the picture. That is, imagine being in a movie theater, taking all the seats out and having all these different surfaces and props, and we're actually creating sounds in sync with the picture.
Captain Talon! Rome, Devin, Loden, get to the stable!
You know what? I didn't quite make it from Runaway, so can you pick it up there? Today we get a chance to do the stables, when the big dragons come out from behind the barred area where they're kept. They have big, big footstep sounds as they come out. And Allison, what do you think about the dragon feet, though?
I think it should be nail. Lots of nails and...
Typically when we approach a scene, what we'll do is we will look at it first, then we'll just do the footsteps first. That gives us a chance to really see what's going on and get a feel for everything sonically.
You know, let me try the run out again. That was wrong.
Then we'll do the dragon footsteps, which of course we get a chance then to balance, if you will, between the human footsteps, which would only be so big, and the huge dragon feet. And in fact, even sweeten, that is, add additionally the sound of the nails of the dragons, because you clearly see them, at least in one of them, as they're coming towards us. And then from that point, we'll do props, and generally we do foreground to midground to background. Good. The dragon wings, we're using a large cape we bought for a couple other films we had to use recently. Yeah, I think, Justin, what we'll do is, since they're coming from the BG to the foreground, Al's going to do it by herself. So Allison and I, we will use it in such a way that we create this big flapping sound. So, I mean, we really feel like that when we hear that flap, you think that this creature is literally held up in the air by its wings.
Good tools are key to any profession, but to a Foley artist, tools are everything.
Any good Foley stage looks like a garage sale gone berserk. The reason for that is there's so many different things we might need to use for a film or a video game or whatever it is that we're working on. Of course, the first thing we use is shoes. I probably have about 80 to 90 pair of shoes, each with unique properties. And yes, it's true, I do have a beautiful pair of red high heels, which only come out on certain occasions. We also need an incredible amount of props. I'd say we probably have somewhere around the neighborhood of 5,000 different props here on the stage.
I'll give you a little less blood spurt.
Could be something as large as a hood of a trunk, or it could be swords, could be arrows, could be pretty much anything. And again, this whole collection allows us to create any sound, custom sound for the project we're working on. When we do that right, you, the audience, don't know we've done it, you just believe what you're hearing.
The PlayStation 3 is by far the most advanced gaming system ever created, and even a seasoned developer like Part4of4 needs to learn new methods and new tricks to unlock its power.
One of the biggest challenges making photorealistic next-generation games on PlayStation 3 is that we are at a level of quality now where we compare with movies and television and special effects, but we don't get to use some of their tricks.
When you're creating a movie, the director can say, I want exactly this shot. I'm going to frame it this way. And you can work with that because you know, oh, the back of the head you will never see because it is not in the shot. So you can only build the face. We don't have that luxury. In games, the user has the control over the camera. You can always look around, and if there is no back of the head, it falls apart. So not only have we reached the detail level of movies and the rendering capabilities of movies, but in terms of production value, we have to deliver more than the movie guys ever had to do.
And what makes this possible is Sony's cell technology.
If you look at your household PC, it basically is one unit that does all the processing in there. There's one thing that does, okay, 1 + 1 is 2, 2 + 3 is 5. There's only that fast that it can go though. And the big difference for cell is that there's a massive group of other CPUs that really can work massively in parallel.
The trick is, of course, to break up the game into small tasks that you can assign to these processors, and then they work independently for the rest of the game. And once they're done calculating, they report back, and you can take those results and send them to other cells.
Early on in the process, Part4of4 discovered a unique way to use the cell technology to their advantage, called progressive mesh.
A lot of people ask us, how many polygons in your Dragon? And the weird thing about that is, with the technology we're using on Cell, on any given frame of the game, I can't answer that question. We're building assets that are movie quality. We take them to the millions of polygons. We're running algorithms that decide how many polygons any given object on the screen should be using based on how far it is from the camera, how big it is on the screen.
We're being ambushed! Protect the mantis!
So in the past we had to create distinct LODs. So LODs means if you're a certain distance from an object, it maybe has 100 polygons. If you get closer, maybe it has 200. If you get closer, 400 and so on. But an artist had to actually go in and create each one of these LODs by hand. And when you switch between the LODs, you often saw like a pop and all of a sudden it had more detail. So progressive mesh allows us to continuously add polygons as you get closer and closer to the object. So you don't have that jarring pop moment anymore.
So it gives you basically a smooth migration from one level to the next. If you look at it, you basically don't notice it happening. So it's a very nice, a very soft look. And again, the great power of the cell processor actually allows us to do that.
Once the cell processors have calculated the polygons, it hands the job off to another chip to put on the finishing touches.
The RSX is the graphical part of the machine. Cell is really good at doing simulations. It is not particularly specialized to render a lot of little pixels from which the whole image is built. The RSX chip is specifically designed to do just that, taking it the final step and giving you the photorealistic finish on everything.
One of the things Factor 5 has a reputation for is very cutting-edge rendering engines. We did some really great things with atmospheric effects in the last generation, and we're taking that to the next level on PlayStation 3. All of our light is real time. The sun rises, the sun sets, the fog rolls in, the fog rolls out, the shadows are generated in real time. Everything is dynamic. Every time a dragon breathes fire, it's casting a light on some part of the world around where that flame is, and there's a lot of fire.
The power of Sony's cell processor allows programmers to create truly immersive gameplay that was unimaginable on other consoles.
The best proof of what Cell and the PS3 really can do is probably that you've got dozens of dragons, sometimes hundreds of dragons flying in the air, and you've got this complete air battle, and usually that would be about it. Now with the PS3, the crazy thing is we can at the same time have a complete real-time strategy battle with thousands of troops on the ground going on.
Just like in a real battle, decisions are being made on all levels, but that does not mean one person can't affect the outcome.
Down to the bridge and torch the enemy troops!
The armies are fighting independent of you. The tide of
When creating the music for Lair, an epic game where dragons fill the skies and scorch the earth, the development team knew they needed a composer who could capture the essence of the game with a dynamic score.
Our composer on this title was John Debney, and he was fantastic to work with. He's well known for his movie scores.
Let's take everything up one dynamic in the strings only.
He did Sin City and Passion of the Christ, and we were just really excited to work with him.
Well, I was first approached by my agent. He asked me, have you ever considered doing a video game? And I said, I'd love to do one. Tell me about it.
Lair setting is a world in chaos, and you are part of a Top Gun squadron of dragon riders.
It was so inspiring to me personally, writing the music to this game. Truly, the story inspired me, the visuals inspired me, the conceptual art was just brilliant. It was great. This world is so unique, and yet it's not so foreign that we can't feel the same emotions that the characters are feeling.
There hasn't been bloodshed like this for centuries. Some of them had never even seen battle.
But unlike many game soundtracks, the team wanted the music to not just play in the background, but to help tell the story.
We wanted to have more of an operatic approach to the score itself, so it's more of an overarching music composition where we have a beginning, a middle, and end.
Act 1 is more Assyrian, it's sort of high civilization. Act 2, then, we move into the Mocap, so it becomes a little more ethnic in nature. Act 3, we have a blending of the two things, of the high culture of the Assyrians and the very, very earthy feeling of the Mocap.
So we have the music that mirrors the story. It just brings a whole new level to the experience that we're giving to the player.
After months of hard work, the team came to London to record some of the greatest musicians in the world at the famed Abbey Road Studios.
Today we recorded a 75-piece band, pretty much the full array of everything that you could ask for.
I've had many directors that ask me, well, why do we need to go to a scoring stage? And I said, well, you'll find out.
John sends us mock-ups in synth format of different vocalists, different instruments.
The synth tracks are like a black and white snapshot of what the color photograph will be. And the great thing is when you're working with a creative team that maybe haven't experienced the energy and power of the live orchestra. And to see their faces, literally it's just sort of an epiphany of, oh my gosh.
You get this full sound that you just can't get anywhere else, and it's just been an amazing experience recording here.
A human being, whether they're playing a violin or they're playing a trumpet, they are using both their emotion and their technique. Synthesizers, it's all digital. So while I think that synthesized sounds are getting better and better, there's still a human element. And I would bemoan the day that we're all just creating things in a box, because this is the magic.
This is Julian Eggebrecht. I'm director of Lair, and I'm here with Brian Kruger, the producer of the project, and Brett Toasty, who took over the design lead relatively late in the process of the whole game, but who's got a hell of a lot of insight into all things Lair. So we want to talk in this commentary for this level and in the following levels a little bit about anecdotes from the production, but on the other hand also what's relevant, how do you build a video game, and what are the interesting challenges with next generation games, which especially the PS3 hasn't had that many of, and Lair is really one of the first titles which tries to stretch the hardware as far as we can take it at this point in time, at least. So why don't we go back first to 2004, because I think that's really when Lair started, right, Brian?
Yep. We had some ideas from within the team about how to move away from vehicles in our games and how to move toward creatures, and really trying to make that the focus for our next-gen products. We knew we wanted to continue to work to our strengths, which are these enormous environments. There's incredibly high level of detail, and we have a pretty good feel for flying. But we just felt like we'd kind of been there and done that with the sort of flying craft game that we'd been doing. And what was exciting was to bring an animated character into that, bring some personality in. And I think we had a lot of different directions we looked at going, and some were more fantastic than others, but that I think really, Julian, you were the one who got the team focused around the world that would ultimately evolve into the world that we see here in Lair.
Yeah, it started slightly contentious in the sense that there was the one faction in the company which loved traditional fantasy, and there was the other faction which was very much into sci-fi and science fiction movies, as we've worked on the last 10 years. I'm more on the science fiction side of things, to be quite honest. So I was a hard sell. On the other hand, I saw the whole vision pretty much immediately when somebody said Dragon game. Before this generational jump, I wouldn't have thought about it even. But when it was brought up now, it kind of all gelled as the next logical step for where our macro, huge world games with a craft could go. Because the perfect craft is really a dragon, because it's not a craft, it's a living being. So you suddenly can relate to the craft, and that's what's missing in any other fictitious or basically existing universe, where you just fly around in a spacecraft or a plane for that matter. We also knew that that if we had even a fraction of our old gameplay in there, if we needed to display dozens and dozens and dozens of objects and very detailed things, and all of these objects making the initial call that it would be a world around living creatures, would have to be animated. So we knew that on last generation hardware there would be no way, but for next gen that could be that big next jump. And if you've got a creature also inherently, and the dragon in the traditional sense can land. So we could finally figure it out how to seamlessly go from the air to the ground. And in terms of, we'll talk about it later in one of the desert levels, in terms of the gameplay implications for that, I got extremely excited about it. Because before this generation, we always had to cheat when we were going to the ground and up into the air, and in the end that limited the game design. So the project had a rocky start throughout the first year.
Very rocky start. We lost the lead artist.
Right.
We went through the lead designer. I think you had some surgery. We had some of our programmers had surgeries that then required further surgeries due to complications. I got pneumonia twice. We had something like 10 babies born on this project. It's been a rough one.
10 babies and I had a divorce.
Yeah. Oh, there was the divorce too. Yes. And then to top it all off, I think there's a reason for this, and that's because we went and looked at a bunch of games that had dragons as the central focus, and I think even the great ones in that batch didn't really meet with widespread mass market commercial success.
Right.
And we sort of decided that there was a dragon game curse, and
there is.
Our goal was to break that curse. And folks, if you can take one thing away from this commentary, don't mess with a curse.
Well, one of the things that I think was probably the curse of the previous Dragon games was, both Julian and Brian were sort of alluding to this fact that we wanted to go with creatures and go more organic. Well, there's a real reason for that from a gameplay standpoint. All the other Dragon games treat dragons like a vehicle.
Yep.
It's all about range combat. It's all about shooting. It might as well be machine guns on these dragons. And one of the things that we really looked at was, how do we make it personal? How do we put the organic aspect of a dragon in there? And also, what can dragons do? They're big, strong, powerful creatures. How do we convey that? How do we turn that into gameplay? And the way that we thought was, sure, you can do the range attacks like a lot of other dragon games, but we wanted to really introduce that physical element so you could get right up next to the other dragon, claw him, bite him, flame him, grapple with him. Or just ram right into him. And the advantage was, one, it added a whole new depth of gameplay, but the other thing was it really allowed you to see the power of all these dragons fighting. And that was one of the really key design goals that we were trying to do throughout the entire game of Lair.
Although we abandoned practically every single design element around it sooner or later. It was interesting. We started out, and then we readopted them, and they're all back in the final product. Now it's really interesting because initially in 2004, in the initial pitch, it was weird because what was in there was projectile combat, and it was fire. It was all about fire. Then it went into the fantasy direction, and suddenly the dragons could do lightning and electricity and water and ice and all of this stuff. Whoa. which would have been absolutely terrible. We even started out prototyping that. Then there was this whole other section which talked about dragons basically duking it out in like the old 2D fighting games from the arcades. And on the one hand, I thought, wow, this could be really cool, this whole physical element of the dragons. I didn't see the extent quite at the beginning how far it would go. But on the other hand, I had an unbelievably tough time, as had the initial design leads who were basically tasked with it, including the one who actually pitched the initial idea. Because it was very hard to grasp how you would go from a 400 miles an hour flying dragon into somehow dragon combat between two dragons. We had these terrible prototypes which had these 2D fighting game elements in there, and which didn't work at all. So that was cut first.
And also had the fish dragon in it. I think that it's like this dragon, the little fish fin sticking off its face.
Well, yeah, I mean graphically it was rough, but that's fine. Especially if you're in between art leads. But but no, a lot of the physicality, although people understood it on a conceptual level, and this is, I think, interesting to look at in hindsight. When you now look at the finished game, hopefully everybody will say, yeah, of course, this is how it's supposed to be. And if you look at the 2-pager back then, and if you look at the final game, it's basically, yeah, this is exactly what the 2-pager promised, and which Sony actually spent a hell of a lot of money on, based on that 2 pages on paper. But the problem is that when you start realizing what reads so easy on paper, you suddenly think, oh boy, this is really not working, this really is not working. And the first year of Lair was trying all of these things in different permutations and failing at all of them. All of our prototypes were terrible. They were absolutely horrible. And on top of that, we were so fixated on what in the end should have been the thing, which is basically the physical combat, that we altogether discarded what actually was an inherently very fun mechanic, which is just shooting fireballs. We completely discarded the whole fire element of the game for quite a while, because and that was a huge mistake as far as I remember, because that could have been an easy gratification in the beginning. The funny bit is that throughout the last year and a half of the project, every single one of these prototyped systems, which we all abandoned because we all thought they were horrible, somehow at one point it all clicked, they all came back, and now they're in the final game and they're actually fun. It was a very interesting.
After rescuing the bird,
it's like radio morning talk show.
Yeah, we got some wacky sound effects.
You just need toilets flushing. That's about it.
There you go. Hi, this is Brian Kruger yet again, and this will be the commentary for Battle for Acelia, the final level in the game, one of the densest and most difficult levels, and when I think of dense and difficult, I think of Shane Hollander, who's been with us. Okay, that was mean. Shane Hollander, who's been with us on this project for a while now. He was brought in to do one role, but he ended up being an associate producer and a design consultant on Lair. And Shane is one of the best players of Lair in the world at the time we record this. I'm sure within 30 seconds of the game going to retail, that'll change. But
for sure,
wanted to ask you to talk to us a little bit about some pro tips, some strategies, some play styles that you've developed over the course of development here.
Thanks, Brian. Basically, what I want to cover, I guess, is that Lair has a lot of complexities based on using the camera. So if you try to think about the game in more of a first/third person shooter, you can actually rotate the camera or look behind you and acquire targets, lock onto them, attack them, strike them, interact with them in just about any way that you can. And so one of the things to do is to develop a play style with this in mind. You also fly through the world, of course, which everyone should be used to by now, but the main thing is to use your camera. So for instance, when an enemy gets on your tail and they're shooting fireballs at you, you can easily use the right analog stick, pull back, look behind you, and as soon as a targeting glow appears, you can acquire that target, lock onto him, flip around onto his tail, and engage him into like physical combat.
Are you using only the right stick when you're doing camera play?
Well, actually, each of the sticks have their own properties. So the left analog stick serves a variety of purposes as well. So for instance, if you tilt the left analog stick down or up, depending on if you've inverted your camera, when you're doing strafing runs across battlefields, you get a better visual representation of where you're actually dropping your flame breath on troops. You can also turn the left analog stick, or the right analog stick in this case, to the full left or right sides, which then turn the camera 90 degrees. So I find that it's really easy if you want to get the side profile of your dragon. You can take and see enemies and acquire them that way as well. So just by holding down the L1 or R1 buttons and then turning the camera, you can automatically acquire targets as soon as you swivel the camera. So even before you see them, you can acquire them.
And what about the player who wants to get a better time on his mission? What are some speed tips?
Well, speed tips, strangely enough, so one of the things that you should know in Lair is that with the reverse charge of fireballs, that it's actually more beneficial to use the large fireball to dispatch enemies based on the heavy dragons or even the light dragons than it is to spam the smaller fireballs in almost every case. The key is to really determine which enemies need which types of fireballs. So for instance, like the ice dragons, they all go down in very short bursts of fireballs, so you can use the smaller ones there. But like if you're facing some of the dark dragons or bull dragons, it's good to soften them up with the reverse charge of fireballs, because they do about 20 times more damage than the small ones. So to get better times, what you want to do is soften up all your targets before getting them into your pursuit bubble, where you're in the side-on ramming mode, and then of course engage them in fire and fight mode.
You mentioned a reverse charge-up fireball. If I can just interrupt you for a second there. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that somehow somebody unlocked the commentary and this level without ever really figuring out what you mean when you say reverse charge-up fireball. Can you tell us what that means, and then maybe talk a little bit more about how fire can be used?
Exactly. Okay. So the things that you should know about fire that we really want to make sure came across in the designs was that with the reverse charge-up fireball, if you just tap the fireball button, square button, your first fireball is always really large. You'll notice there's kind of a heat shimmer on it as well. Biggest fireball you have, that does about 20 times more damage than both the medium fireball, which is in between a rapid pressing of the square button and kind of a medium press of the fireball button.
So you've got all these fireballs, but you've also got all the physical combat maneuvers, the pursuit bubble, the fight mode, and all of that. And I've seen you do some really great things where you combine all of these techniques and you're able to still keep your carnage up, but do things very quickly. Can you...
Were Roan not...
Hi, this is Brett. I'm here with Julian again, and on this particular level we're going to talk about really sort of the spinning plates gameplay. How did we, just sort of a little bit of the background history on how did we want to design a level where there's multiple objectives that are active at the same time?
The spinning plates gameplay really came about through the PlayStation 3 and through what the macro-micro level, which we're finally able to do seamless, because any prior game which we worked on, even when it went down to the ground or into the air, it was a huge undertaking to even go sequentially from ground to air and then back to ground, and it was very, very staged because the hardware had to load in things. Now, with the PS3, we knew that we finally would break that barrier, and when we basically got going on the game design for the individual levels, we also knew that we should take advantage of that. The deeper you would get into the game, to not have everything run so sequentially anymore, and to get more into a sandboxy type of gameplay. And that really, for me at least, on the very much macro level, which I have as the director, was one of the most exciting things, because that was fresh, that was new. Nobody had done it before, and it was directly tied to the hardware, because the hardware was the enabler here. Because without this hardware, that simply wouldn't work, not in that detail level. And I think everybody, there were certain groups within the designers who very much went towards that direction, including you, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it was always appealing to me from a gameplay standpoint to have really sort of one core objective, and for this level it's, save your people. And that's a very clear objective, but it was really appealing to say, well, you know what, there can be multiple things threatening that objective. It can be dragons, it can be the army, it can be the huge large creatures, it can be these boats that are coming in, and all of these things can be happening at the exact same time. The real challenge there from a gameplay standpoint was, okay, everything's happening at the same time. Obviously the player can't be everywhere at the same time. They need to pick and choose. What we were really trying to do is say, okay, if you want to go attack the boats, you can attack the boats for a period of time, but if you just focus on that one aspect, you're going to lose the mission. You need to deal with that aspect for a period of time, maybe just